Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to give it about 2 to 3 more minutes for everyone else to join. I can see there's a lot of people rolling in right now, so just bear with me for about 2 minutes, maybe slightly more. Right, everyone, we've still got a few more people joining, but just to make sure that you can all hear me, if you can just head over to the questions section of the GoToWebinar interface and just say, hey, Guy, how are you doing? Just give me a quick hello. Wonderful. That's all flying in. Perfect. Great. So there are a few sections. There's obviously a chat and a questions box. We're just going to use the questions box for the entire time. So anytime that you guys have any questions, just type them as we go, and then we're going to answer them all in bulk at the end, just so that we're not distracted as we're going through it. But thank you, Elizabeth. I'm very well, thank you. I hope you're okay. Okay, fantastic. So there are a few more people joining, but we'll just get underway and at least start with the intros. Perfect. So hopefully you can all see me now. Thank you again for joining me. It's good to be able to actually speak to some people on the end of this line rather than just me and my camera for the videos that I post on LinkedIn. So I hope you're all having a wonderful day, and thank you so much for spending this next half an hour to 45 minutes with me. Perfect. So most of you may already know this, but my name's Guy, and I'm one of the senior solutions consultants at BlueHub. So it's my role to work with the end users of cloud accounting systems to help them select which apps are going to work best for their business. BlueHub specialize in inventory apps and also job management apps. So anyone that is selling products and selling time that need a little bit more functionality than that Xero and QuickBooks can provide by themselves, that's where our team come in and really help them with 1, the system selection, and 2, the setup. And what we're going to cover today is very much around the inventory side and more so around system selection rather than the setup. So we're going to run our first poll just to make sure that you're all listening and you're all with me on this Thursday. And I hope the weather is as nice by you as it is by me, because it's absolutely beautiful outside. So first poll, just simply want to know if you've attended one of our other inventory focused webinars, okay? So that should be launching on your screen now. Perfect, okay, wow. So that's actually a bit of a surprise to me. So I'm just going to close this and share the results. Okay, so 86% of you have never been to one of our inventory focused webinars, which is absolutely great. It's always good to speak to a new audience, and about 14% of you have seen one of these before. So we do have a bank of webinars on this topic. So we've looked at industry specific ways of viewing inventory. So we've looked at e-commerce and wholesale clients, and we've also done some more where we've really dived into the apps. Now, over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be launching our YouTube channel. So all of this content that we've done in the past is going to be available to you for free, totally on demand whenever you want to check it out. So if you want to learn a bit more specifics about e-commerce or wholesale, you can go and view those webinars whenever you want to start taking that knowledge on board. But this is going to be a bit more of a general overview. And what I wanted to do this time that differs slightly to the other webinars is we're going to focus more on the real world application of these systems. So at the end of this, we're going to look at 3 different case studies that are all based on real businesses that we've worked with over the last year or so. And that's where I think you guys are going to get a lot of value. Just for context, the vast majority of you are accountants or bookkeepers who have clients that are working in the cloud already. Some people on this are end users themselves, actual businesses, but this is really going to be tailored slightly more towards the accountants who are in the audience and bookkeepers too. Perfect. Right, guys, so we're going to get this underway. So what we're going to cover today, we are going to take a look at the key sectors that are affected by this. So sectors that need inventory. The limits of Xero and QuickBooks Online. So both these systems manage inventory inherently, but they're very, very limited. So we're going to take a look at when these systems are suitable and when we need an add-on. We're going to look at the main features of the inventory apps, the add-ons themselves. We're going to actually take a look at the individual systems too. We're also going to go through the app selection process, so things you need to consider when you're working with a client on selecting an inventory app. And then we're going to dive into some of the case studies. So as we've said, anytime you guys have any questions, I'm really keen to answer them. So fill up that little questions tab with all the questions you have as we're going through this, and at the end we'll answer them in bulk. So what sectors are affected by inventory, right? I mean, it's probably pretty obvious, but anyone that is selling or making products is going to need some kind of inventory functionality, whether it's a spreadsheet, whether it's within the cloud accounting system itself, or whether it's in a standalone app. So the sectors that we're thinking about here are e-commerce, wholesale and distribution, manufacturing, and then retail. But in reality, most of your clients are going to be some blend of these sectors, right? So we only have a few clients that I can think of that fall neatly into just one of these. So we've got a couple of e-commerce only businesses that sell mugs online, for instance, and don't do any wholesale. But in general, the vast majority of our clients are some kind of blend of these. So a lot of our clients are wholesalers and also do e-commerce as direct consumer. And a good amount of our manufacturers also are doing more direct consumer sales. So manufacturers commonly are selling wholesale, but now more and more of them, because e-commerce is getting so affordable, are also selling direct consumer. And it's actually this blend of different sectors that adds our first level of complexity. And that's the fact that many companies now have more than one sales channel. It's not like they're manufacturing their goods and selling them to one distributor. Often they're going to manage customer relationships themselves, and they're going to need to be able to enter orders into their system in a multitude of ways. But obviously, each sector is going to have its own considerations that we need to build in. Manufacturers, for instance, are going to have to think about a bill of materials for their items, where an e-commerce company may not need that. We may have a fashion retailer who needs to think about the sizes of their clothing, the colours that they sell them in different variants. So each sector does have its own specific set of requirements and questions that we need to think of. So that's why we did our series, Is My Client Too Big for Xero?, where so far we've looked at e-commerce and wholesale. The reason why we've done these two industries first is we found that these are the main sectors that are looking to move to cloud. Obviously, they're selling online in the space of e-commerce, so it makes it really easy to sell them on the idea of cloud accounting and cloud inventory. So these are the main sectors that we're going to consider when we're thinking about inventory apps. But as you're all well aware, Xero and QuickBooks Online already have some inventory functionality. So the first thing that we're going to do is dive into how both systems handle inventory and compare the two. And then this will then give us a basis for when a client's going to be too big to use just the cloud accounting apps alone to manage their inventory, and when we're going to need to look at using one of the few inventory apps. Perfect. So for this, obviously, we're looking at Xero Standard and Premium. We're not thinking about the cash book side of things. And for QBO, we're looking at QBO Plus. So these are multi-currency editions, okay? So inventory limits, this is the first thing we need to think of, not just with the cloud accounting apps, but also with the inventory apps themselves. Most systems will have a hard limit on the number of items that you can load into them. Now, QBO is kind of unique in the way that it doesn't have a hard limit. You can technically put as much product data as you want within there. Xero, far more common, has a limit of 4,000 tracked items. So a tracked item is something where we're interested in knowing how much stock on hand we have, and untracked, we're not interested in stock on hand. So untracked may be used for a line item on a quote like freight, for instance, where we're not interested in tracking any of the items. So if you have a client that's on Xero, or a client that you want to move to Xero that you know sells items, the first question to ask is, how many items do you sell? And then that'll start to give you an idea on what the limits are. Okay. Next, both products are limited to simple inventory. So the easiest way to sum up simple inventory is when you buy the item as you sell it. So I buy one mobile phone and then I sell that mobile phone. I'm not making the mobile phone where I need to understand what the components are. So anytime that we need to know the components of an item, we class that as a complex item, as it will need a bill of materials or a kit. Another example of a complex item would be something like clothing, where you have one design, long sleeve t-shirt, but it comes in multiple colors and also multiple sizes. That would be a complex product. Another example actually is any time that someone needs to be able to trace an item. So anytime they have batch numbers or they have expiry dates. So anytime that anyone's selling anything that's consumable, be it things like dog food, we have a client that does that. It could be tea or drinks or whatever it may be. So simple products are where these are limited. Then you can also only have a single price tier. So this means one price that we're able to set against the item within the system. So the phone sells for £100. This is going to be an issue for anyone that has any wholesale type customers, where they may have different pricing agreements with different clients. They'll need to have multiple sale prices against a single item. There's no ability to manage warehouses in these systems. So when we're thinking about warehouse management, we're thinking about two main things. One, the locations within a warehouse. So the bin and the aisle that the item sits within a warehouse, to help the staff understand where they need to go and collect those items to fulfill the order. The other element of warehouse management are the number of overall warehouses. So it could be that they have a site in London and a site in Yorkshire, and they need to manage the inventory independently. Another example, actually, of this same thing of having multiple warehouses are some customers will need virtual warehouses. So this would come if they have consignment stock with a supplier where they own those goods, but they don't currently hold them on their site, but they need to be able to track where that value of stock is. So if anyone needs to manage multiple locations, again, they're going to be too large for the cloud accounting apps alone. There's no 3PL integration. So 3PL is third-party logistics. This is where, say, an e-commerce company will own the stock that they have, but rather than having a warehouse where they manage the storage and fulfillment, they'll actually pay a third party for this. This is getting to be increasingly more common. And many of the businesses that use a third-party logistics company will want to link their systems with the third-party logistics company. The reason being is that as the third party are delivering the goods and updating the orders, you don't want to have to manually double enter that in your system from emails that the third party company are sending you. You want it to be the case that as they update their systems, it is updated in yours. And that's what many of the inventory apps are now able to do. And again, Xero and QuickBooks alone can't quite do that. Same with EDI. So EDI is electronic data interchange, and it's essentially a universal integration where people are able to send and receive orders. It's very common with anyone that's trading with any large retailers like supermarkets, and also to large trade organizations, things like Screwfix, for instance. EDI allows the customer to send you an order, and then through that same integration, you're able to then send them their invoice back. So it's a really efficient way of managing orders, and many people that are trading with large supermarkets will get a preferred rate for their goods if they are willing to use something like EDI. They don't manage the ability to back order or drop ship well. So this would be where you receive an order off a customer, and then off the back of that, you send that order to your supplier to deliver it straight to the customer. Again, this is becoming an increasingly popular way of managing your supply chain. But again, due to the lack of integration and just general lack of inventory functionality, they're not able to see that there is an order that requires a piece of stock and that there is incoming stock for that that will never meet the warehouse. So if you do have clients that are doing drop shipping and they're using just QuickBooks Online or Xero, they're going to have a great deal of manual effort to keep all that up to date. Another one is a lack of order management, and this is actually more common around purchasing than sales. So a really common scenario when accountants bring their clients to us is that their client needs the ability to raise a purchase order, to then send that to the supplier, and then have the ability to just partially receive goods if they come in multiple deliveries. So QuickBooks actually manages that relatively well. Xero, on the other hand, has no functionality for it. So people try a few different workarounds. For instance, they will raise a draft bill within Xero, make a template so they can send that out as a purchase order, which covers the generation of purchase order. But you're unable to receive against that and then mark it as another order that's waiting for goods to come in. The inventory apps really manage this quite well. So they have fixed costing methods. So Xero works in an average costing method, which means if I buy phones from my supplier first at £50 and then at £100, it's going to say that my average value of stock is based on £75. As I'm selling it, the margin will show based on that average amount. Doing a first in, first out, I will first sell off all my stock that was bought at £50 and then the next round that was bought at £100. So if people are looking for actual margins per order, they're going to need to work in a first in, first out manner, whereas some people are happy to work in averages. The main point here is that these are the only options within the system. You're not able to choose from any other functions, whereas the inventory apps are a bit more flexible so they can fit in with how different businesses want to work. The final 2 points are around the limits of the system. So I know, especially in the Xero space, this is much talked about, and that there's a limit of 1,000 sales invoices and 1,000 purchase invoices. What's rarely pointed out about this is that these are actually soft limits. It's not a case of you hit 1,000 sales invoices in a month and then they turn off your Xero account. It's more a case of that beyond this, there may be some noticeable slowing of the system. But we've heard people use well over 5,000 orders in a month in Xero. It may not be recommended because Xero themselves don't recommend it, but it is there and it is a stated limit by Xero. QuickBooks, on the other hand, don't have any hard limit. They've just done an advisory piece where it says over 3,500 transactions, both sales and invoices. There's some noticeable slowing. And then the next limits we need to be aware of are around APIs. So this is an API is the port within a system that allows other software to speak to it. So the inventory app connects to Xero QuickBooks via the API. Now there's a limit of how much data can be sent or received via an API within a day. So Xero again is limited to 1,000 calls a day. So a call isn't as simple as I've sent over one invoice, that's one call. One invoice could be multiple calls, or you could have multiple invoices in a single call. It really depends on how the inventory app relates to Xero QuickBooks. But that list there is the main summary of the limitations of these systems. So essentially, if you've got a client that's got a relatively low number of products that are all simple, and they're managing a lot of the order entry manually anyway, then these systems are going to be quite suitable by themselves. But as soon as someone starts to have, several thousand products, or they have complex inventory, as we discussed before, or they're selling in multiple price tiers, or any of these points here that have a big no next to them, this is when we need to start looking at some of the different inventory apps. Okay. So when an inventory app may be required for a different business is obviously going to vary on so many things. So we're only really speaking generally here. So a guide I tend to find is that for e-commerce businesses, once they're over $750,000 turnover, or they have multiple websites that they're selling on, it tends to justify getting an inventory app in place just due to the volume of orders and also the complexity of their order management and sales channel management. For wholesale and distribution companies, I find this to be a slightly lower number. The reason being is that they're going to need more functions of these inventory apps a lot earlier. So things like price tiers and warehouse management become really, really important for wholesale and distribution companies. Manufacturing companies, this is a lot more of a grey area, but what you'll tend to find is they need a larger inventory system, one that's more feature rich and generally more expensive. So you'll tend to find they need to be over that 1 million turnover mark. Now, turnover, obviously, we're all aware of this, isn't the greatest way to understand a client's ability to spend, because obviously we've not taken into account their margin here, which is obviously pretty variable when it comes to product sellers. So again, these are just real guides. And for retail, I tend to find it's when they've got multiple sites. So if you've got 2 different stores running on till systems, you're going to need some form of central inventory app. And many retail businesses are also having some kind of e-commerce arm. So they tend to have multiple sales channels and can tend to benefit from having an integrated inventory app. Okay, so what are some of the core features that are common in all of the inventory apps? So now we're moving on to, from looking at just the cloud accounting apps and what they can do, we've understand the limitations there, and now we're purely focused on the inventory add-ons. So some really common high-level features here. Obviously, they're going to do stock management. What does that mean? Obviously, we have availability. So this is the number of a certain item that we have on hand, how much of that is currently available, i.e. not allocated to an order. It's also good to know how much stock is coming in from purchase orders, and do you have any stock that's on hold or in quarantine awaiting repair? Inventory apps are able to give you this broad visibility over the availability of your products. The next factor of stock management is around purchasing. So not just the ability to raise the purchase orders, which we'll come to in a moment, but the ability to know when to purchase. So we're able to set minimum stock levels and then reorder quantities or optimum stock levels. So as soon as I've got less than 5 phones, that then automatically lets me know, hey, we need to generate a purchase order to your reorder amount. And it can really start to remove the purchasing decisions from senior members of the business and really empower some of the more technical staff that are dealing with the day-to-day stuff, because the limits and guidelines are set within the system. The other part is location, as we discussed before. Having the warehouse as we see in this image where it's got different bins and aisles, you need to know where that stock is to make pick and pack more efficient. The next side is customer management. So a lot of your clients may think they need an inventory app and a CRM. This may be the case, but just like Xero and QuickBooks Online includes some customer management features, so do the inventory apps. And actually for product sellers, it tends to be usually more than enough. So you'll obviously have all the customers' details, their address, different contacts, may have multiple addresses, their payment terms with you, all that kind of stuff is a given. But it'll also include their order history, which is really important if you want to see what a certain client buys off you regularly, or what did they used to buy but for some reason have stopped. And this kind of order history and the reports you can build from it is a massive advantage to a lot of these companies. Next is pricing. So as we've discussed, different price tiers. And then we move on to the order processing. So often when I'm discussing with a client their need for an inventory app, I tend to say that these are inventory and order management apps. It lets them understand that it's not just a case of managing the stock, it's also about managing these individual orders. So from that, we're thinking about the generation, either having a till system that could be integrated or built into the inventory app. It could be that the orders are coming from a website. Well, that's then integrated. So as soon as an order is received on the website, it generates a copy of that order within the inventory app. Or it could be the case for wholesalers that are calling in, emailing in, even faxing in orders, that you need the ability to type it in. And also the ability to manage partial fulfillment, as we discussed before, but not just that, actually manage the order progression. So to be able to generate that initial order, send them an acknowledgement of that, enter the fact that the customer's approved it, move that then along to the warehouse so it can be picked, and just gives you the ability to see where these orders are at in the chain. Another part is traceability. So not just the ability to trace where a particular order is in the process, as we just covered there, but even to trace orders after the fact. So looking at companies that are selling consumables, where they may have batch numbers and expiry dates. If they get a recall off one of their suppliers, they need to be able to instantly find out which customers they sold that potentially contaminated product to. These inventory apps will allow them to just type in that batch number, pull up every single order and assembly that that component part was used in, so that they can instantly contact all those customers and pull that back. Now you can imagine in a spreadsheet-based system, even if you took the time to enter all those batch numbers, it would realistically not, it'd be a very inefficient manner of doing that. And in an urgent situation like a product recall on a consumable, you need to have that ready at a very quick pace. Next side is product management. So being able to store the product data and product information and things like the description of a product, the product number, images, the weights, multiple prices, quantity discounts, whether that item sold as a single as well as a pack of 6 as well as a pack of 20, and what are the different pricing and cost effects on that. What we're able to do in the inventory app is upload all this data once, and then it's there for every single order to be pulled through. You can even have this web information pulled from the inventory app into the website, so it can remove a lot of the double entry around product upload and information. The other element for complex products are things like bills of materials. So probably pretty known to all of you here, but anytime we have an item that's going to be made up of component parts, we need a bill of materials or kits so that we can manage the stock for not just the parent product, but also those components too. And then finally, we get to the reporting, which I think is a really key area and something that can sometimes be slightly undervalued when telling a client, you know, the benefits of using an inventory app. So the reporting that you get tends to be a lot more functional, I guess. So essentially what I'm saying here is that the P&L and the cloud accounting system, even if we're using tracking categories, may be able to tell us the performance of a particular product range and let us know what our P&L is, you know, on that section of the business. But within the reporting functions of the inventory apps, we can see things like which salesperson sells the most of a particular product at a particular time of year. So if you're trying to make some business decisions, or even which of our slow-moving products which customers buy our slow-moving products, you can then design a marketing campaign to shift those slow-moving products onto the customers that actually buy it. So it gives them some really, really practical reporting and information that they can use to decide how they want to change their sales strategy or change the purchasing strategy of the business. So something worth pointing out here is that the vast majority of our clients are actually inventory app users, and none of them are using just an inventory app and Xero. There's always some other add-on that's included in there. So in this little web here, we've got obviously Xero, the cloud accounting app in the middle, and then we have an integration of different add-ons. So we've got the stock add-on there, which is also linked to an e-commerce website and a point of sale system. This is really common, and then they may want to add a CRM to the side, and then once all that data is pulled into Xero, it's coming out the back into a financial app, something like Futurely, say for reporting purposes. The reason why this is important is that certain inventory apps only work with certain e-commerce apps. So if you have a client that's using something like BigCommerce, which is quite a popular system but less popular than something like Magento and Shopify, then there are fewer inventory apps that integrate with BigCommerce. So it's really important to understand the web of systems that your clients are using. So next, let's dive into the inventory app. So just before we get into this too much, the next series of webinars we're going to do is a With the Apps series. So all the apps that you're about to see now are going to be doing a webinar with us, where they're going to display the great things about their products, but we're going to avoid it being just a sales pitch, and we're also going to get them to talk about which clients it isn't suited for, which is directly in their interest. What these inventory apps or apps of all kind don't want are for businesses to use their system for 1 month and leave. That looks really bad to the investors of these software companies, because they're saying, well, this is an ideal customer that started using our app and now they've left. So they want to make sure that their client selection from an app point of view is really, really clear. So we're going to get all these on to talk about it in much more detail. And as I said, we've covered a lot of webinars on the topic of these individual apps and what they do. So we're going to go through this at a bit more of a quick speed. So the first app we've got is Sin7, one of the more popular apps, especially in Australasia and the UK. It's also one of the largest apps that's available on the marketplace. So by large, I mean one, by cost, and two, by the amount of functions that are within it. So it has things like direct 3PL integration, so that if your customer is using a third-party logistics company, when they receive an order from their website, it updates Sin7, and then Sin7 is able to update the third-party logistics company. And then as that company is working through the order process, Sin7 is updating automatically. There is obviously a much greater cost to this, but for larger businesses over around the 2.5 million mark, that can provide them a lot of decent functionality. One of the strengths or unique parts of Sin7 is that they're able to customize the instance somewhat. So that means an individual user's or individual businesses Sin7 can be customized in quite a few ways. They can add and remove features, change reports, and also do custom integrations. The issue with this is that a lot of their developer time is actually spent focusing on customizing individual businesses' apps, and they're also one of the leaders of adding new features. So they were one of the first to have a B2B e-commerce portal built into the app. They had a point-of-sale system built into the app long before everyone else. So they're really focused on new features and customization. The downside of that is that less time is spent on maintenance, which is far less sexy and interesting for the apps, but it does mean that Sin7 can at times be a little bit buggy. So what I suggest is anytime you have a client that you move into Sin7, it's important to go through a proof of concept phase where you're able to upload some of their data and some of their actual orders and take them through the real world process. In general, for most people, it's going to work absolutely fine. But for those with complex products, maybe multiple levels of assembled products with bill of materials, sometimes the cost and information can seem a little funky. So it's really important that we have a proof of concept when using something like Sin7. So Stitch Labs is a system that I'm personally less familiar with, but our team do use, and it is more focused to the US market. It's really, really well invested, and they're growing their features quite rapidly. It's hard for me to say too many good key points or too many negative points because I've not worked on it as much hands-on, but certainly a negative for the UK market is that it's not really well focused to working in pound sterling and managing VAT yet. It is a newer product and they put a lot more focus on the US market, but it's definitely one to watch. It's very, very feature rich and seems to be very, very well made. The next one is Deer Systems. Now, this is one of my favorite apps at the moment. They've done a lot of great work over the last year or so, adding all the correct features that you need. So it now also has a B2B commerce portal, which is ideal for wholesalers that want to avoid their clients sending in email and fax orders and have them deliver those orders in a more e-commerce manner. It also has a full manufacturing functionality as far as assemblies, disassemblies, managing wastage, and so on. So it's a really flexible tool. It's also one of the most integrated from an e-commerce perspective. So it links with all the major e-commerce apps, but more importantly or more uniquely, it also integrates with the main marketplaces. So not just Amazon, but also eBay and even Etsy. So for e-commerce businesses that are selling maybe on their own website, as well as a few marketplaces and maybe have some complex products, Deer is a really, really ideal system. One of the downsides, I'd say, of Deer is that as an opposite to Sin7, it's not remotely customizable. They don't offer per instance customization. It's more of an out-of-the-box solution, but it's really, really well priced, and most people are able to adapt their processes to fit Deer. The next one is Unleashed. So this is by far the most popular of the inventory apps in the cloud space and has far more users than any of the other systems. From a functionality point of view, it's very, very similar to Deer. It has a lot of the same features when it comes to manufacturing, so assembly, disassembly, wastage, bill of materials. What it also does very well, as does Deer, is it's able to manage those traceable products, people who have batch numbers and expiry dates really well. So it's really suitable for anyone that's selling any kind of consumable items, especially if they're manufacturing themselves. So one of the niches that Unleashed has found is in the brewing space and distilling space. Anyone that's working in alcohol, they've really made a good little niche for themselves there, because you're able to input the recipes within the bill of materials, manage the assemblies, and then also be able to track all those component parts and batch numbers against the finished product and then the expiry dates. So it's really well suited, and it's a really, really well made system. One of the differentiators between Unleashed and the rest of the apps here is that it also has a live sync with Xero. So Dear Instant 7, for instance, you choose when you want to import your data to Xero. So most of our clients do this twice a day, once at lunch, once at the end of the day. This tends to be really suitable actually for a lot of manufacturing companies that want to make sure all the orders are at the right stage before moving it into the accounting system. Unleashed has taken a live sync approach. So as soon as you raise an invoice in Unleashed, it generates an invoice and puts it into Xero. As soon as you complete an order is fulfilled, it'll then do the journal entry to remove that amount from the inventory account into sales. And it's constantly syncing and constantly communicating. So that means if your clients are using some of the reporting apps like Futurely, it's going to give them the most real-time data experience. A downside of this approach, though, is that you're unable to batch and consolidate invoices as easily. So those with really high order volumes where we may be concerned about the API limits, it's a consideration to have. Is Unleashed going to be suitable there? And then the final one we're going to talk about is TradeGecko. Sorry, it's a bit hard to see on that screen, so it's TradeGecko. It's one of the more basic apps. It's still really good, very, very reliable, and they are growing features all the time. The way they differ is they grow their features by doing little modular components. So I think they've recently released a B2B portal, and you choose if you want to add that to your instance, and then you can integrate it. So I find TradeGecko is really well suited for smaller companies, smaller e-commerce businesses, anyone that's just starting out on Shopify maybe, and also has some wholesale stuff that they're dealing with. TradeGecko can be a really, really suitable app for them, but it does kind of have an upper limit to the functionality there, especially around complex products. It doesn't deal with that quite as well. So that was a really quick overview. A good way of seeing this also is that from right to left, we're going from smaller businesses to larger businesses. Again, that's not a hard set rule, but definitely a way that you can see it to simplify things. So we're going to do another poll now, just to see if you have any experience with working with inventory apps. So what I'm looking to understand here is, have you ever helped a client with one of these? Either select it, set it up. Do you use one of these on a client's behalf? And so let me know. We're going to launch that now. Okay, almost there. Just give it a couple more seconds for a few more votes to come in. Perfect. Okay. So we can see that over 3/4 of you have had no experience with these apps. Some have access to a client's app, and then there's an even split between those that have helped a client select and even helped a client set up an app. So I think that's quite interesting. So yeah, I think if you've got no experience, you're probably just looking to gain some initial context around the marketplace. So I think that should give you a good general overview, of what's out there. There are, I think, about 27 inventory apps on the Xero marketplace, and these are the only ones that we work with. It's not to say that the other apps aren't suitable, but we definitely find these are the more mature offerings that work really well for the UK and US markets, where we're quite interested. Moving on, so going through the app selection process here. Really, there are 4 main parts to helping your client select one of these inventory apps. First, we have an initial conversation with the client where we're really keen to understand their expectations. We've nicknamed this the triage call within BlueHub, where we're really looking to quickly assess what's the issue here that we're trying to solve, are we able to solve it, and what app do we think would do it? And are the client's expectations in line with something we can achieve? Step 2 is a detailed review of their systems. So this is going to require a bit more time. Maybe you go on site, you really dive into their current processes and systems. Then we go into system research, where we take those findings, their requirements, and find which apps are going to work. And then finally, we move into a proof of concept. It's really important to test these apps with real world data from this client to ensure that it's going to be a good fit. So let's dive into these in just a little bit more detail. So first, we have the initial consultation stage. So we're going to get a high-level look at what their requirements are. I'm going to give you a few questions in a moment that you can ask to ascertain this. Then we're going to understand what their hopes are for the new system. And then we're going to get a grasp of what their current systems are. So understanding their hopes and understanding their expectations is really, really important here. What I'm finding now is there are more and more, especially young owner businesses, that expect quite a lot from software. More and more are expecting that they'll be able to have a fully automated system where the customer enters an order on an e-commerce system, it updates what needs to be picked from where into a box of a certain size, packed in a certain manner with a certain label that's automatically printed, and then the delivery's booked with Royal Mail automatically. Now, they're not out of line to expect this from software. It's definitely available and included in a lot of enterprise level solutions. But just like Xero and QuickBooks Online, these inventory apps are small and medium business products. If they want that level of automation that I just laid out there, the likelihood is they're going to need something like a NetSuite, a Microsoft Dynamics, something where you're looking in the six-figure a year software spend. In reality, these are all coming in at far less than 10,000 a year, many far less than 5,000 a year as a total spend for the software. And the reality is that some of these features are restricted and only available on these larger products. So make sure that the client understands that when they're going in there. Yes, there will be a greater increase in efficiency. Yes, there will be some automation and there will be many integrations, but there are still going to need to be some involvement, some human interaction with this system. Then we need to move on to a detailed review. So it's not a case of just speaking to a client and finding out, oh, they're an e-commerce company, they sell on Shopify. I know that Unleash now works with Shopify, so I'll send them over there. Unless you know details about their products, their processes, it's not going to be suitable to give them a recommendation at this stage. So we like to review their current systems. What software do you currently have in place and what features of it do you use? Do you already have any integrations and automations? So I went to see a client recently that we're doing some consultancy for, and this client is working on an Access database that was made about 10 years ago, and it looks really old and ropey. You know, it doesn't look great. It seems very much behind the times, but it has some fantastic automations and integrations that they're really, really dependent on. And it's actually quite challenging to find an off-the-shelf product that's going to be as custom to their needs. So make sure you clearly understand what do they currently have in place around automation integration. When you are reviewing the systems, do it by department. So it's not really beneficial to sit down with the owner of a company, especially if there's more than, say, 10 employees, and ask the owner all the questions about his or her business. You really need to get down with the person that is actively working on the system within their role to understand what functions they need on a day-to-day basis. We also need to do a process review, so understand what are the manual processes they have in place on top of these systems. We also need to take into account what the future plans for the business are. Do they plan to expand their product line, and will this now take them into a higher product limit than the app you were initially thinking? Do they plan to add more sales channels, and are they going to be on apps that you're able to integrate with? Then once we have all these requirements and processes, it's important that we split them down into their must-haves, which is likely what they're currently doing on a day-to-day, and then their nice-to-haves, which is going to be the reason why they want to move or change their system. It's important to split these two because clients tend to get really wrapped up in the nice to haves. I want to be able to work remotely. I want to be able to have reporting information at the touch of a button. And they kind of forget that they also need to be able to accommodate the price tiers for all their wholesale clients, because this is something their system already does and isn't a headache for them, but something that you need to be able to accommodate for within the new app. Then we move on to doing that system research. So obviously a step of that is researching the systems. And then the next is building a suitability grid, or that's more the first step. And we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail next. So we'll go through this. And then we do a demo. So what's the difference between a demo and a proof of concept is a demo is just going to be using general data for a similar business. You're not going to necessarily show them the system with their exact processes. You're just going to show them the system and get their initial feedback. This is something we do as part of the free initial consultation. So anytime one of our accounting partners brings a client to us that may need a bit of help, we take them through step one and a demo, usually in around 1 hour, just to have a quick chat about what their requirements are, understand which app it's likely to be, give them a general demo. Then if they feel like, yeah, that's the type of app I want to explore a bit more, then we can move into the detailed review. Then we want to build up our proof of concept, which is going to require some of their data. It's really important that you do this with the multiple products that they sell. So if they do sell some simple products and some complex products, make sure that you use both examples within the proof of concept, and likewise with their process. If they use one shipping provider for packages of a certain size and another shipping provider for larger packages, you're going to want to take both of those into account while building up the proof of concept. Okay. So moving on. So here are the questions that you want to ask your client during that initial call. So this is just a few of the main ones that are really inventory focused. Many of you will already have general new client fact finds that you complete. And it's just a case of adding these questions to it when you're working with inventory focused clients. So what are your sales channels? Do you have any B2B sales? If so, what's the most number of price tiers against a single product? The reason why that's important is, for example, Deer is limited to 10 price tiers, whereas Unleashed and Sin7 have an unlimited number of price tiers that they can accommodate for. How are the B2B orders received, right? So are they emailing them? Do you have already in place a B2B website? Do you have multiple warehouses? And if so, do you manage all of them, or do you use a third-party logistics company? How many sales or purchase orders do you manage a month? What's your current turnover? And what's the projected turnover? Number of products sold? Multi-currency, fixed fluid. So I'm just going to get all that up. These slides are going to be made available, and this whole video will be added to our YouTube channel. But if you have a few client meetings coming up that you may need this for, just take a quick screenshot now, and then you can have that and just add that to your existing fact find documents. Okay, so we're going to move on now. So then when we go to research the apps, first we're going to gather the requirements. So that's just a case of writing them down, moving them into those must-have, nice-to-haves, and then what we like to do is rank them. So it's not just a case of, yes, it's a must-have, yes, it's a nice-to-have. It's going to be a bit more granular than that. So you may have it where ones are must-haves and fives are nice-to-haves, and then you can scale the different requirements around that. Then we can go on to build our suitability grid, which may look something like this. So when we're trying to communicate with a client why we've selected a certain app, we found this to be a really, really useful tool. So along the left, we have our different requirements, and then we have 3 different systems that we've assessed. We give it a simple tick or a cross if it's an absolute yes or an absolute no, and then you'll see we have a few asterisks around there too, where we'll add a footnote if we want to make it clear and some specifics around that yes or no. So then once you've reviewed the possible systems and checked it off against your suitability grid, you can then have an idea of, well, do you have multiple options that could be suitable? If so, is it worth doing a proof of concept in both? Or do you want to talk about the general pros and cons of these systems with the client? You know, a real simple one may be that if both Unleashed and Sin7 are suitable, well, the real clear differentiator is going to be the price. So you can say, look, both these apps are going to cover the requirements you need. One's going to be about half to a third of the price. And that can obviously make that decision pretty clear. But most times what you'll find is there is one clear standout system. So then it's just a case of understanding how it's going to work with their manual processes. So with system selection, the main stuff you need to remember is what are their current systems, what are their current processes, what are their requirements, and which of them are the nice-to-haves, and which of them are the must-haves. They're the main points that you need to keep in mind when helping a client with app selection. The important thing to note here is that this stage is not just restricted to inventory apps. This could work for absolutely anything. It could be as simple as which reporting app do you want to give to a client. You can list on the left-hand side the type of reports they want, whether they want a dashboard view or a printable version, and then you could start to compare Futrally against Spotlight. So you can take this methodology and use it in many of your client relations. So just a reminder, you can keep sending in those questions. We're now going to move on to a few different case studies. Okay, so we're going to do 3 in total, and they're all based on real world examples. We work under NDA, so I can't be giving out my clients' names, but this first one we're going to cover is actually also available on our website as a testimonial, is with a company called S.E. Simons. So they are a wholesaler of haberdashery. I said that right, fantastic. So that means they sell things like ribbon, wool, and they have a huge product range. So let's take a look at the profile of this company. They're just over 5 million turnover. They had over 20 employees. It was actually, I think, around 26. They had a growing e-commerce side to their business, which didn't just include their website that was on Magento, but it also included a growing Amazon demand as well. They had a huge product catalog, so over 35,000 active products and another 20,000 that were inactive, which is absolutely massive. And you can imagine completely would have crushed Xero's 4,000 limit. So that was a huge reason why they needed to get an inventory app in place. And they had really large order volumes, so over 3,000 sales orders in month. So it was important that we were able to consolidate those orders into a more functional amount for the accounting system to make reconciliation easier. And they'd recently changed systems. So this company, when we spoke to them, had 1 year using QuickBooks Desktop. They thought that was going to be the answer to all of their problems. They were previously on Sage and just found it a real hassle to keep it up to date for their way of working. Essentially, as well as having e-commerce, they had they have a large site which had a trade counter. And they essentially wanted to empower more of those counter staff to be able to manage the relationships, different price tiers, different customer specific quantity discounts, and Sage just wasn't really giving that to them. So they moved to QuickBooks Desktop in the hope that that would do the same, but then that didn't quite provide the integrations they needed for their growing e-commerce side. So their accountant had spoke to them for a while about maybe moving to a cloud accounting focused system. So let's take a look at their systems before. So for accounts like QuickBooks Desktop, their point of sale was also QuickBooks Desktop. So this is where they were entering the orders for the trade store. They had a CRM, which contained all their order histories, which was in QuickBooks Desktop too. Their orders were processed all the way through in QuickBooks Desktop. So you're starting to get the picture here, right? They were purely working on QuickBooks Desktop, and then they had Magento as well, which was taking in the vast majority of their orders. And then the staff downstairs, in between dealing with customers in the shop, would actually manually enter those onto QuickBooks Desktop. So it was just a really inefficient manner. And also, due to the nature of the amount of products they had and all the different pricing agreements they had in place, it meant that the staff had to remember what a certain price discount was for a customer that bought one of their 35,000 products. It was actually amazing to see how good the staff were at remembering which product was what just from a supply code. They could remember, you know, the vast majority of that library. The issue with that is that if any one of those staff left, that's a huge learning curve for the next person to come who's going to be working the till. So we worked with them for a while, and we put forward a plan to move them into the cloud alongside their accountant. So we moved their accounts to Xero. Their point of sale system and inventory system became Sin7, which also managed their CRM, order processing, obviously inventory. The marketing was still on MailChimp, which we could then integrate with Sin7, and their e-commerce marketplaces stayed on Magento and Amazon, but now they were able to directly integrate them. So it didn't mean that the staff had to go and manually do this transition of data. Just as soon as an order was received, they could then see it on their screen and then work on what mattered, fulfilling that package and getting it out as quick as possible to satisfy those customers. What it gave them then is a central point where they could see all of their orders, all of their order history, the individual prices that a certain customer buys a product at could then be automated. And it just meant that they were able to future-proof their business a lot more, so that when that next round of staff came in, they had to retain far less information and they could just start processing orders quickly. So again, this is a full case study that's actually on our website. So if you go to bluehub.co.uk/blog, or just head to the blog page, there's a blog there called Sin 7 Inventory Management Case Study, where we go into this in a little bit more detail if you want to check it out. So the next one we've got is a furniture manufacturer who sell direct to consumer. That's what D2C means. So they started as bespoke manufacturers of furniture, and then they started to define their product range, which became more fixed. So now essentially it works by you select which chair you want, and then you have a few options for what the finish would be, whether it was on casters or if it just had feet, what the padding would be. So you're able to customize your chairs. So they were at 1 million turnover, but growing very, very rapidly. They had 7 employees and very fast growth, as we covered. Their products were incredibly complex, as you might imagine. So there were all the different component parts that they had to manage, ordering them in from different suppliers, sending then out the part finished piece of furniture to a third party potentially to be painted or finished, having that come back in to add any embroidery or any soft finishings to it. So they not just had complex products that obviously required a bill of materials, but they obviously sold the same products, that same chair, with different variants. So a variant, going back to the t-shirt analogy, would be this long sleeve t-shirt in either blue or black or white, and then the different sizes. But for them, it was even more complex than that. It was chair A with finish 1, with seating 2, with wheels 3. So it became really, really complex for them. Their way of managing it was that they had a spreadsheet in place, which we'll get to in a moment, but only one user within the business was able to manage this because they needed a lot of context. The benefit was they were already using cloud accounting. So for their inventory management, they were using a spreadsheet. For their job costings, so managing the order of each of the component parts, sending that out to third parties, recording all those costs, was all done on a single spreadsheet. Their order process, again, was on another separate spreadsheet. They were already using QuickBooks Online for their account, so they were really engaged with the cloud. They knew that eventually they would have to make this move to an inventory app, but they were just waiting for themselves to break that 1 million threshold, and then that's when they came to speak to us. Their CRM, again, was on a spreadsheet. So it's not that spreadsheets are bad. Obviously, they're very, very flexible tools and great for many, many purposes within a business. The issue is that these were incredibly complicated. So each order would not just have chair A, a quantity of 1, it would list each component part and option that was there. It meant that that one person within the business had to process every single order, every single third-party transaction when it came to finishing a product, managing the delivery of those goods and updating it on the sheet. And it was all just on a spreadsheet that, okay, it was held on the cloud, but it didn't matter because they weren't able to share the responsibility with anyone else because you needed so much context to make the spreadsheets matter. So what did we do with them? Their accounts stayed in QuickBooks Online. We moved their inventory management to Unleashed so that we're able to assign a bill of materials to these finished goods. What they now do is they'll pick a basic chair. They'll go in and select the different options that they want. So the color, be it yellow, which casters they want. They can then choose to see, do they already have that component stock in? Do they need to order any of it? And when do they want to schedule the assembly for? What this means is that as the salesperson entered the order, they'd already started the process of the job costings and order processing. So it managed to remove some of their manual steps. Now, obviously, they're still selling bespoke products, so it's still going to have some manual steps for them to enter it into a system correctly. But what it meant was they needed far less context for how the spreadsheet was made up, and that there was much more visibility as different individuals in the business were working on the same orders. Their CRM was a mixture of Unleashed and QuickBooks Online. They didn't need much more, and what you'll find is not many people do. But you may find that some of your clients come to you and say, look, I need a CRM. I'm really struggling to manage my orders. CRM is a very, very universal term for a lot of people that just means business software. And what you may find is that as soon as someone starts to mention they need a CRM to manage orders, what they're really saying is they need an inventory and order management app. Okay, so moving on to the third and final one, and I think the last one may be quite a common scenario for a lot of you, where we are looking at clients that are on spreadsheets, or maybe they're already on cloud accounting and they need to add some additional functionality. But definitely for the UK-based accountants, this next scenario is going to sound very, very familiar. So this company were a trade wholesaler and manufacturer. So essentially what they did is they built parts that went into the gate industry. So any electronic gates that you see would likely have a component that this company made. So they're at 2.5 million turnover. They have 13 employees. One of their main considerations is that they offered next day delivery. It was a very competitive space. In order for them to satisfy their customers, they had to ensure that they can get the goods to site the very next day, which when we're thinking again about these inventory apps being heavily focused around order processing and fulfillment, that's a really, really key consideration. They had customer specific pricing. So the items they sold were variable in lengths, in increments of 5 millimeters. And it could be as low as 500 millimeters up to an almost unlimited amount. And each increment would have a different price, different cost, and different customers buying in different increments of different versions of the same product would then have a different payment structure, right? So it was very, very complex customer pricing. They also scheduled orders. So they would sell to some large construction companies. In order to keep the cost down for these large construction companies, what they would do is they would place an order at the start of the year, and then as time goes on, they would call off different items from that same order. So they needed to be able to have a single sales order from a customer that could then be fulfilled in stages, and the ability to enter on that order what dates they needed to have it fulfilled by. They had complex bespoke products, so as well as it being variable lengths, there were also multiple components that had to vary within that length, so very, very, very complex products. They wanted to be able to empower their admin staff, or more importantly, take some of the workload off one of the directors. So within this 13 employee company, there were also 3 directors on top. Now, one of those directors had to enter the requirements for every single order that came through, and they're managing 10, 20 orders a day. And he would need to then go in and declare what component parts are going to be needed, what was going to be the cost of this item, what was then going to be the markup and sale price to that specific customer, and everything would go through this one director. And he was working well over 12 hours every single day managing these orders. Meanwhile, his admin staff were only able to give him the basic information. He'd have to go and use his various spreadsheets to do these calculations. What he wanted to be able to do is, one, improve the visibility for him and his directors over the orders and general state of the business, but he also wanted the ability to allow the admin staff to do more of the bill of materials generation and pricing. And again, there was a deep lack of reporting within his current system compared to what they needed, and they really wanted to increase the visibility they had over their business data. So what did they look like before? They were on Sage 50. They used it for their accounts, for their inventory management. All of that price and part calculation we were just discussing was on a few different spreadsheets that only one of the directors could really manage. The production management was then done on paper. So once he'd figured out which component parts we needed, if they were in stock, they'd then print out a piece of paper that then goes through to the workshop for them to then build that order on. Then they'd have to manage all their delivery, and they're turning this around within just a few hours. So having paper was not the best way for them to be able to make sure that nothing got lost, nothing got missed. Order process, again, was managed all on Sage. They actually had started moving into the cloud by using Capsule as their CRM. They were largely using this to manage the different communications they were having with clients, but it gave them a keen interest in the cloud. To just give you a bit more insight, the main director that I'm talking about here that had the workload also moved over to the UK from New Zealand and wanted to go back and forth more frequently. And with Sage being entirely server-based, it just meant that this wasn't going to be possible. Through using Capsule, he was like, oh, well, I can access this system remotely when I'm away seeing my family. Why can't I do that with my accounts? Why can't I do that with my inventory? So that's really what got their interest going in the cloud. Their website, where they were doing some sales for the more simple products that they also sold, was done on WooCommerce, which again is a very heavily integrated app and very suitable to cloud. So we worked with this company for quite a while. As they had very, very complex products, we took them through a very lengthy proof of concept stage to really ensure that this was going to work. So their accounts moved over to Xero. Their inventory management moved into Dia. We then generated a custom application where they would choose which of the products were ordered. Then they could enter the variable size and different options. This would then automatically produce the bill of materials, parent item and price. So it meant that just from the information that the customer would call them with, they were able to enter into the system and instantly generate that bill of materials and a price. That data was then linked into Dia so that we could then manage the production of the item, generate the bill of materials, and also add a due date for the assembly to be done. It also meant that they could then put a computer into the production room so that the guys could see what items they had to produce, what time they had to produce it by, and then also let the directors know once it had been completed. By them doing that, it also updated the stock levels for the component parts. So what you're seeing here in general is these apps allow you to delegate more tasks to the employees rather than keeping it on the senior level of staff, while maintaining or adding to the visibility that the senior staff do have over the business as a whole. Not just the sales reports, as I discussed before, purchasing reports, but also down to the level of production. Again, order processing was on Dia. We managed to keep the CRM in Capsule and now integrate that with Dia. And their website remained on WooCommerce, and as you might imagine, was integrated with Dia, right? So previously, those orders that were coming through WooCommerce, just like our haberdashery wholesaler, that had to be entered by an individual. Even when it was a simple product, it still meant one of the admin staff had to do that double entry, whereas now they're just able to approve the order and send it through. Meanwhile, it's not that they've lost a job. They're now able to focus on things that are going to help the business much more by using that custom app to generate the parts and pieces, okay? So they're three quite different examples, but they give you a good flavor of the types of systems people are moving from, where they're moving to, and the considerations we have, okay? So we're going to get to the questions shortly. I know we've gone a bit longer than we expected, but just want to cover what's next. So as I mentioned, we're going to have our YouTube channel that's relaunching soon. It's going to have all the content from today, as well as previous webinars on the same topic. Will the slides be available too? Yes, they will. I can guarantee that'll be a question that's there. So at the start of next week, everyone that's in attendance today is going to receive an email from us. In there will be a link to the YouTube channel, as well as a link to a free PDF that we've done as a guide to e-commerce software. And also we can make the slides available through that too. So another question that comes up is can you help me with a client? So if you've got a client in mind that you feel is a bit too complex for you to handle at the moment, our process is very, very simple. All you do is you head over to bluehub.co.uk. You'll see the first button here allows you to book a call back today, and then you can go click that, select a time, and then we can just have an initial chat about the client and see if it's something that we can assist with. We offer every single one of your clients a free initial consultation where we will run through their high-level requirements review and also then hopefully identify which system would be a suitable first demo. And then we just give them that, and all of that is completely for free. At the end of that demo, we can then either put forward a proposal to give them some initial consultancy to dive into those requirements and do a proof of concept, or if it's a really simple case and the app's clear and they're ready to go, we put forward a proposal to implement the app and train up all their staff. Okay, perfect. So we're going to dive into those questions now. Let me just open it up and have a read, so just bear with me for a few minutes. Oh, well, okay, so we've got quite a few here. Okay, so we're just going to go back a couple of steps. So the question is, why did we need Unleashed for this? Why couldn't we just use QBO? So the reason why for this client here, the furniture manufacturer, the reason why we wanted to, or they wanted to use something like Unleashed was it gave them much better control over the bill of materials, right? So in QBO, they're not going to be able to manage that bill of materials. So what they can do is they can set it up in Unleashed. These are the standard component parts. They're also then able to go in and change it around. So it allowed them to have much better control over the products and allowed them to reduce the total admin time rather than having to deal with all those stock as individual adjustments. And something like QBO, using that bill of materials, removes that step. Why Deer rather than Unleashed in the last case study? Good point. It was just that at the time, so this was over a year ago now, Deer was slightly more suitable for this client for what they needed. So it had some things like quantity discounts and so on, that was just more suitable for the client. We went through a really lengthy proof of concept stage with this one. So we did look at a few different systems. It was more around Deer and Sin7, but Deer provided the functionality that they wanted. So something that we found that's really, really suited, really effective here is rather than you trying to push the product on the client because it has a huge operational impact into their business, it's really important that you just display it to them, take on their feedback and allow them to really do that final selection. Have we worked with any systems that are not that integrate with not on the high street? No. There may be some third-party integrations out there. You could have a look at things like Zapier, OneSAS, and If This Then. We do have some clients that do work with not on the high street, but they just tend to manage those orders manually. Have we used Vend? No, we don't really specialize in Vend. There are a few people out there, I think Possible is a company, that really focus in the EPOS space. Frankly, we found that most of our experience internally is around these partial manufacturing, wholesale e-commerce businesses, and that's an area we really like to major. And the truth is, at the moment, obviously retail is not going through the greatest time, and it doesn't look likely that that trend is going to change. So we found that a lot of retail businesses actually have a more restricted budget for things like software. Okay. So just going through these questions. Okay. Okay, so Nigel Gilroy asks that he has a client that has really complex items. They're building machines with 100 components and want to manage the purchasing stock levels. The machine is to be sold one day, so the challenge is at the component level. So what I would ask this client is, are they just looking to manage the inventory and costs for the 100 component parts? Or do they need to also manage the production of it? And if so, is it going to be in stages? 10 components go together, another 15 go together, then that becomes a final piece. What you'll find is that if they are just looking to manage 100 components for a single bill of materials to track the cost and inventory, then really something like Sin7 will probably be quite suitable. But if they have more of a staged production approach, you're probably not going to be suitable with one of these apps. And if they're working with a small budget, as you know, they may actually struggle to find something suitable, because I'd be kind of recommending they look at one of the more enterprise level solutions. Something you may want to look at, Nigel, with this one is Exact. So obviously they are going through some changes at the moment with how they're handling the UK market. But their product is actually quite well suited to people that are manufacturing large, complex products in a staged manner. But it does take quite a lot of admin time to keep it up to date. Again, a few people have asked if the slide deck is going to be made available. Yes, it will. It'll come out in the email following this next week. Okay, perfect. Right, so there are all the main questions everyone's asked. So Thank you all very much for joining me today. I really do hope you found this useful. I know it's a massive, massive topic. It's really hard to cover it all, but my hope is that you've left here with at least some idea of which add-ons are suitable for the UK market, some of the main questions to ask your client, and also the process that you need to take them through. I'm getting a lot of nice words coming through. So yeah, thank you everyone for your time. I look forward to hearing your feedback about the YouTube channel. And yeah, hopefully I will see you at another one of these soon. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week too. Thank you again.